You're listening to NAPAbroadcasting.com.
Thanks for joining us here on NAPAbroadcasting.com. Lately, with the current news coming out of Washington and the world, it feels like we're living in a boiler factory. Just yesterday, I read a story about the role of news fatigue and exhaustion in impacting how we think and how we vote. But beyond all that, least we not forget that the one area that still works, that still matters, that responds to our needs and impacts our lives, is local and state government. Over the next few months, we'll hear a lot about both. And I want to begin that process today as I'm joined in the studio by our Assembly member, Cecilia Aguiar-Curry. She was elected 2 years ago, is up for re-election this year, and it is my pleasure to welcome her here to Napa Broadcasting. Cecilia, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for including me today, and it's a great opportunity to spread the word of what's happening in local government.
Well, it's a delight to have you here. You've been there 2 years now, your first term. Talk a little bit, before we talk about issues and the specifics of all of this, about what it's been like for your first 2 years in Sacramento.
You know, quite frankly, it's been fabulous. I love every day. I can't wait to go to work every day. And there's challenges, and the challenges is that mainly is that this district is so large, and to making sure that I watch over my constituents. So the number one thing I decided when I ran was that I was going to make sure that I knew this district backwards and forwards, and that my policies would be really geared to this district.
Talk a little bit, for those that don't know, for those that are here in Napa or that are hearing this in their own part of the district, how large the district is, some of the cities, some of the areas that it encompasses.
Well, we start with the northern part is Lake County. We have all of Lake County and all of Napa County. We have portions of Sonoma, Colusa, majority of Yolo County, and Solano County. So it's quite diverse. Every area has a little bit more challenges than the next, but they're all great opportunities, I look at, as to how can we change and make people's lives better.
Talk about some of the common threads through all of those places. And I want to talk about some of the things, certainly as it affects Napa and some of these other areas, but there are certain, I'm sure, common threads that affect all of these communities.
By far, it's housing. Housing is the number one. That's the issue throughout the whole district. Transportation needs, access. And when I say access, is access for medical education. We have a lot of difficulties getting people that want to get medical help or actually go to a junior college, to a university. So just access, as I would say, is probably the biggest challenge I have, and it goes across all the spectrums.
And certainly the housing problems are fundamentally different. They're different in Napa than they are in Lake County or Colusa County, where there isn't the same kind of demand.
Mm-hmm. That very much so. So I chair the local government committee over at the Assembly. I've done it now for 2 years. It's been a great opportunity. But the thing that's really difficult with it is that being the only woman north of Stockton in the Senate or the Assembly, that I have a lot on my shoulders for rural and agricultural communities and children. And I prioritize those. And the issue is with housing is that one size does not fit all. And it's always a challenge for me to convince my legislative friends in Southern California that some of these great ideas that they have don't always work for us. And you might see my votes are questionable because I will always make sure that if there's something in a bill that does help rural communities, it's difficult for me to vote on those. And so they're starting to learn that, and they're starting to make sure that we have something in those bills for rural communities.
And what are some of the things for rural communities and for housing that you think need to be addressed?
And mainly it's zoning. We have a lot of zoning questions. Some of the smaller communities do not have a staff that can help out update their general plans, update a lot of the issues that they have with the local communities, be able to, if they have a building inspector, a lot of them are contracted in smaller communities. So smaller communities do not have the resources to actually make change in their communities. So with the housing, it's hard to say to a smaller community, well, you now can do accessory dwelling units, which are small, almost like tiny houses. And they don't necessarily have the staff that can actually implement some of those great ideas that are out there. So with the rural communities, there's many challenges, and I want to make sure that they're not left behind.
And talk about some of the challenges in a place like Napa, where it's a whole different set of housing issues.
It is a whole different, like I said, each district's so different, is that I spent some time when I was in my campaign, I met with the city manager and the mayor of Yountville about their issues, about how many people have purchased homes there and now we don't necessarily have housing for many of our workers that are up and down the valley. The costs have gone sky high. The schools are being impacted. So I have been very diligent in working with some of the community nonprofits here in Napa County, trying to find out what are their issues. They had a workshop of like, how do we get more housing in the valley? And one young lady stood up and said, so how many of you want these housing in your backyard? And it was dead silent. So that's a challenge. The challenge is also is that maybe, how do we look at maybe working more with Napa State Hospital, some of their lands, maybe with the junior college here at Napa, looking at putting some housing for students. Maybe we should be looking at Yountville as finding some staff housing there. So there's definitely opportunities. It's just obviously getting everybody on board to agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Certainly one of the things that seems to affect all of the areas you represent these days is the issue of fire and the danger from it and the results of some of the fires that are going on. And we're in the midst of fire season now. Mm-hmm. Doesn't, as we were talking before we went on the air, doesn't show any signs of getting better. In fact, maybe getting worse before the summer's over.
It's definitely a challenge, and it's been very upsetting to me. I feel like, everywhere I go, there's a fire. We just, the county fire over in Yolo County and part of Napa and Colusa just is now 100% contained. And it just seems like every time we turn around, there's another fire. We had the other one up in the Pawnee fire up in Lake County. The impact, not only to the environment, but the impact to the people has been devastating to me. And this past year when we had the fires that raged through here, Napa County, Sonoma County, Solano, in fact, my whole district was on fire, I think, at one time. It really affected me. I felt like I had PTSD, and I can't even imagine if I actually lived here and had my house go up in flames, how I would feel. This past year, we worked a lot in the assembly with other co-workers, assembly members that are in this district, on how can we make it better? What lessons can we learn? And we learned a lot of lessons. And those range from insurance issues to what do we do with healthcare when healthcare facilities are closed? How do we do with families that only get 2 years to try to get back on their feet? Doing one of my policies is to extend it for 3 years, working with the insurance companies. Is everybody happy with me? Absolutely not. But the fact of the matter is that when you go through something like this, it takes your heart and your soul, and it just reminds you of, like, I would want to be in the position of so many of these residents, is that you can't rebuild in 2 years. It's just a matter. Extending it 1 year means nothing. I mean, in the whole spectrum, because right now what we're facing in Sonoma and Napa counties, we can't find workers to build new homes. We're having a labor shortage. We're having materials, concrete, wood products. Those are all very difficult to get, and the price has gone sky high. So we need more time for our people to get back on their feet.
And what has happened with respect to working with the insurance companies and the appropriate legislation to try and put all that into law?
Well, I have to say that I'm very proud of, there's a group of us, about 8 legislators, that sit down and we have done listening, like a listening session. So we've had conversations. They come in. So we've had insurance companies come in, tell us what the issues are with you. How can we work with you? We've had attorneys come in. Consumer attorneys have come in. We've talked to the utilities. We've talked to the environmental community, the environmental justice community, so that we can gather information on how can we make sure that how do we deal with the fires going forward? Should the utilities be reprimanded? How should they be reprimanded for the fires? If they should be reprimanded, what direction do we go on this? So we've had those listening sessions, and now we're moving on to a major committee hearing, and it's called a concurrence committee, which will be headed by Senator Bill Dodd, along with 5 other senators throughout the state, and along with 5 other assembly members throughout the state. I was not asked to be on that committee, unfortunately, because I'd really let them know what I really thought, but that's okay. But those committees will be held. They're public hearings. They're going to start on Wednesday next week at 10:30 at the Capitol, and they're going to start going piece by piece on how we can make this all work. They will touch every aspect of it. the number one thing I want to assure the listeners is that we are very concerned and we are going to be very supportive of the ratepayers. We want to make sure that they're not necessarily dinged for what has happened. And at every single meeting, that is the number one question that comes up, is saying we cannot have this hurt our ratepayers. So whether you're insurance, whether you're with the utilities, whatever, it's always said, we're here to protect our ratepayers.
What's being done or what's being talked about in terms of prevention, in terms of looking at this as a much broader issue in terms of the state and what has to be done in terms of the forests and agriculture?
Well, truly in the concurrence committee, that will be talked about again. I've had numerous meetings with CAL FIRE, with the fire industry, with the firefighters on how we can move forward, with environmental groups, how we can move forward, with land trusts. And everybody is sitting down at the table trying to figure out what's best. I met with Sonoma Land Trust last week, and we went over some of the lands that they lost. And in retrospect, part of the thing is it's okay. It's not okay, but it's going to help the environment even more. They're going to have more critters out there, and the grasses are coming back, and gives them some time to actually evaluate the land better. But we're working with all of those types of groups to figure out where we're going to go. Things that have come up out of this, what I think's actually kind of good is we're doing a bill on biomass products. And for instance, the timber, what do we do with some of this timber that's been burnt? What do we do with agricultural products? What do we do with all those waste products? And we're looking to work with private investors as well, public-private partnerships to do biomass products. So there's a lot of good that's going to come out of this, I think. Unfortunately, it harmed so many people.
And another area that you've been working on related to this is the whole area of emergency preparedness.
Absolutely. So we've done a lot on emergency preparedness. We're working. I'm doing a bill on, for instance, for healthcare. So when the fires went through, a lot of people didn't realize a lot of the healthcare centers were closed, and people still had healthcare needs. And what we did is that we did a bill so that the healthcare providers could be reimbursed if they were in a mobile unit, because by law they can not get reimbursed if they're not in a brick and mortar facility. So if they're under a tent for a short period of time while they do healthcare, whether they're in a mobile unit or a pharmacy that's a mobile unit, people have to be assured that they still have healthcare during that time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the other areas that you're working on that don't involve disasters. I know two of the areas that you're particularly focused on are mental health and childcare. Talk a little bit about those.
I really wanted to grasp the knowledge of what I needed is what is it important about how can we fix mental health? Where do we start? And while I was in the facilities, I had a long conversation with a couple of the nurses, big burly gentlemen, and we talked about it, and I said, I don't know that I could fix this. And they said, I don't think you can either. But what you can do is to listen to our story. And their story is that the place that we need to work is with children and infants, and we can identify issues with children and their environment early on. So with that knowledge, and after many tears after I left those facilities, I came back and decided that we really needed to work with the children from 0 to 3 years old, as well as older children. But primarily because so many families have to work now, they don't have good child care. And child care is very expensive. And between 0 and 3 years old, you can have a family member take care of your child, but sometimes if you had someone else looking at and advising you on some of the things with your child, you might notice that your child has some disabilities, or they might have some needs that a family member may not recognize. So with this bill, as we call it, the $1 billion for babies. And it's basically is to help daycare facilities upgrade their facilities if they'd like to. They apply for a grant, and we upgrade those so that they can take care of children from 0 to 3 years old. We also change the subsidy because it's much more expensive to have the children from 0 to 3 years old. So we increase the subsidy on that. We are offering more classes for daycare providers so that we can make sure we have more. We need about 60,000 places right now in the state of California for these children.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's one of the ones, and that gives me great reward on that one. And the Women's Caucus, it's their number one bill, and we're really excited to get that one going.
I had the opportunity last week to attend the California Broadcasters Association put on a forum on basically the state initiatives and state politics this year and where all the money was being spent. Mm-hmm. And after a lot of talk and a lot of analysis, at the end of the day, what all of these consultants that were there said is that all the money is going into the gas tax issue. All the money is going into the gas tax issue. It feels like this is going to be something that's going to be front and center for the next several months until Election Day. Talk a little bit about that from your perspective.
From my perspective is that, I started in local government. I started in small town of Winters, and I worked on infrastructure projects in Winters, and we had to upgrade our sewer system and our streets, and it's very costly to do that. And part of that is because I think many of us will agree is that we don't always put in our budget for operations and maintenance. We never do that. Cities and counties just don't do that. It sounds like a great thing that they're going to, but they don't. That's why we have potholes, right? And I kept thinking to myself, I can kick the can down the road and make sure we don't do anything. And, for my political career, which to me that's not an issue, but for the political career is that you don't want to come back in 2 more years and then have another bill and it's cost even more money for infrastructure. So I decided. So when we did the transportation tax, SB1, I said I'm voting for it. I know not everyone's going to be happy with it, but the fact is, how long do we wait? The longer you wait, the more expensive these projects get. And they also provided jobs for the region. And so SB1 is a really important bill to me. I see right now some of the work going on right now, but it's polling bad. It's polling that this bill is going to be repealed, and that would be pretty scary for me. So we're looking at so many ways is that I'm sure there's going to be a lot of money. I think a lot of people will be stepping up and saying these are good jobs. We need to fix the roads. And we'll see who all comes to the table. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of special interests spending money on that bill.
A lot of money. That was the impression I came away from.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if it is repealed?
That's going to be a really good question. The locals are going to have to figure out how they pay for their potholes. One thing I do want to say is that if you look at our website, you can see the list of every single county and city in my districts, what they're going to spend the money on. They were asked to already give us a project list, so the project list is available for all the public to look at, and you can see what they are prioritizing here in Napa, in Yountville, St. Helena, whatever. They're all on our website. So I recommend highly that people take a look at that because until you have a flat tire or and it cost me $400 for my flat tire, I thought, maybe people would understand when it really hits home. But it's an important bill. It's providing incredible jobs for the entire state of California.
Talk a little bit about how Sacramento is functioning these days. For a long time, we used to hear pretty negative stuff about how the legislature and state government function. I don't think that that's as true anymore at all. Talk a little bit about that.
I will say I think that it's doing really well. I came in with a group of 10 brand new legislators, assembly people at the same time, and we have our own group. We call it the New Dems. And we get together on a weekly basis or biweekly basis and discuss issues throughout the building. I'll say is that it was tough this year because we have some sexual harassment things that came up. Did we need to clean our own house? Absolutely. But I don't think people really realize all the good work that people are doing in the building. I think they're thoughtful. I think they think things through. Are there a couple of bad players? Oh, absolutely. I can tell you there's a couple of bad players. But I think that when people realize and they start trusting you and they come in and they know what your policies are and what you're going to fight for, they come in and they are very respectful. So any lobbyist or any special interest that walks in my door knows that I have a couple rules. One is, how does it affect rural communities? Because it is much different. The bills need to be different. We need to be flexible in the bills because we are left out. How does it affect my agricultural communities? every single time. How's it going to affect ag? Is it going to hit transportation? How do we transport our agricultural products? Water. So every single time, those are my issues. And the last one is always children. I always say, how is this going to affect the children in my district?
Mm-hmm. How do you balance, and you touched on this when we were talking a little bit about fire and housing before, the fact that some of the area in your district is so rural, and then there's Napa, on the other hand, which is far less so, becoming more urban by the day.
It is becoming more urban. I got to tell you, I did prioritize Lake County, and I did that because I had spent quite a bit of time up there during my campaign, and I would leave always very sad because I did think that they were left out. And I think that they also had to know that they need to be at the table to make sure that the state helps them out. And I think they fought government as a whole. We went in there with guns blazing. We decided, what are we going to do? And we're going to do it quick. So we secured about $20 million to find out about the health of Clear Lake. What do we need to do that? And we're working with a lot of stakeholders up there. We're working with UC Davis to help us to figure out about the health of the lake. If UC Davis can help make Tahoe blue, I want to make them make Clear Lake clear. We're working on economic development also through the Center for Regional Change out of UC Davis. UC Davis has gotten so interested in Lake County, they have also found additional grants for me for students up there. So there's a lot of people that are working up there. So, I really put a lot of focus on that. We're working very hard on that. But then, like you said, the fires came along, and that really disrupted my cart for a while. So we spent a lot of time on all the fire and evacuations and legislation.
Right. And what's the most fun part of the job?
Oh, gosh, meeting people, hearing their stories, fixing what needs to be fixed. I have an incredible staff. I have about 11 people that work for me. They work on my constituent work. I love when I get a nice note. Your regional people are taking care of us. I feel like government's working again. So that's the stuff I like. I really like being out in front of people. Today I had 2 different groups in there, and I get a big lump in my throat when they start telling me about the things that they're doing. And I said, I can help you. This is what we'll do. And so it's kind of like a big jigsaw puzzle, and putting the pieces together and making sure the government works for them.
And running for election every 2 years. That's the tough
that's
part.
That's a whole nother tough part, If someone said to me, well, you're running unopposed, and I said, when I ran, I promised myself that I would work so hard that people trusted that they would believe in the work that I'm doing. And every day people come up to me and say, I love your bills. I like what you're doing for the district. You're here for the district. And that's what I just love. So, yeah, every day I like going to work. That's great.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us.
Thank you
Appreciate
very much.
it.
Thank you,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Thanks for listening to NAPAbroadcasting.com. Napa Valley Radio for the way we live now.